Before we get to the clip, Noam Chomsky has argued that the U.S. has a long history of intervening in Haiti, often to the detriment of the Haitian people. He points to the U.S. being the last Western nation to recognize Haiti's independence in the 19th century, and the 1915 invasion and occupation as examples of this interventionist history. Chomsky contends that the U.S. has traditionally backed Haiti's wealthy elite, even when they have poor human rights records. He argues that the U.S. overthrow of democratically elected President Jean-Bertrand Aristide in 1991 exemplifies this pattern. Now off to this wonderful clip of Chomsky.
Glad to learn what I'm supposed to talk about. That's fine. Well, anything will do, I understand. Well, let me lead in from the last talk I gave, which was last night in New York, where I had to be taken out under police protection. You can guess what the topic was. It was about the Middle East. Tonight, if anything controversial comes up, I'm going to hand it over to Paul, so he can... well, a word about the Middle East. Maybe just so I can have some continuity. A very short word. You may have seen kind of an interesting article in the New York Times Magazine a couple of weeks ago by Deborah Sontag on the Palestinians. In it, she made a good point. She says she was talking about the difficulties of discourse between Palestinians and the West and why it never seems to work. And the problem that she pointed to is quite real. She said the Palestinians keep harping on history, where history means anything that happened more than about 5 minutes ago. And the West doesn't want to waste time on all this sort of old-fashioned, boring nonsense, but just get on so that the West can lead the way to a glorious future. And that makes discourse really hard. And actually that point generalizes all over the world. Those who have their boot on somebody's neck never want to know how it got that way. That's boring, old-fashioned, dusty old stuff. Let's just go on with our boot on the neck and make it even better. But the ones who have their neck under the boot, they somehow have a different view of things because they're backward and uncivilized and, you know, that sort of savage, you know. I was asked to say a couple of words about the background, including the history, meaning what happened more than 5 minutes ago, which puts me on the side of the victim, so that's good. I'm happy to take that position. That's the position we ought to take. No, not necessary to say. As far as democracy is concerned, I think it's very clear why Haiti doesn't meet the standards of democracy. The same reason it didn't meet the standards 10 years ago when it had its first democratic election. The election just came out the wrong way. The election was, the U.S. was certain, confident that the election would be won by its candidate, World Bank official, who would lead the country to, you know, on to this brand new era of neoliberalism that had already had a certain history in Haiti. He got 14% of the vote. And out of the woodwork came a populist priest who got 2/3 of the vote without any funds or any publicity or anything else, because things had been going on in the country that nobody paid any attention to. They were in the slums or in, you know, in the hills and places where no real people live. But they had organized a vibrant democratic society, maybe the most democratic society in the hemisphere, or maybe in the world. But on their own, you know, without control from above. And that doesn't fly. You know, that's not democracy. It's not for us or anyone else. And furthermore, this is pretty official. So instead of quoting myself, I'll quote a real expert. Thomas Carruthers is the best-known scholar of on issues of the emerging democracies in Latin America. He's written the standard work, and he writes from an insider's perspective. He was part of the Reagan State Department, involved in what they call democracy enhancement programs. So when he writes on the effect on, you know, bringing democracy to Latin America, he writes from both as a scholar and as an insider, and he's pretty honest about it. He says that the Reagan policies were very sincere, but they failed. And they failed in a curious way. He said in the areas where U.S. influence was least, namely in the southern cone of Latin America, there were real steps towards democracy, which the Reagan administration tried to prevent, but wasn't able to prevent. They sort of happened anyway. So, in the areas closer, where the United States has much more influence and control, in fact has basically run it for a century or more, the policies still were sincere, but they just didn't work. And the reason was that the United States, he says, wanted top-down democracy in which the traditional ruling elites remain, who have been associated with the United States, remain in power, but under democratic forms. And in a sense that was achieved, but as an honest person, he thinks that's not real democracy. But he's correct. That's exactly what the United States wants, and you'd expect any powerful state to want. Some kind of formal democracy because it sort of looks good, but top-down forms in which traditional elites, those who have concentrated wealth and power in their hands because of their alliances with the boss in the West, us in this case, they have to remain in power. Incidentally, the same picture is held for the United States itself, or always has been, back to the Constitutional Convention. So that's the picture for us, and it's got to be the picture for everyone else. There's even a technical name for it in the academic literature. It's called Polyarchy. So theorists of democracy argue that we ought to have polyarchy, not democracy. Polyarchy means small groups of elites, what James Madison called the wealth of the nation, the wise section, those who have sympathy with property and its rights. They ought to rule. The rest ought to be factionalized. They are allowed to participate because it's a democracy, but periodically. They participate by every once in a while coming out and lending their weight to one another of the responsible men who represent the wealth of the nation, those who have the interests of property at heart. That's the way this country is supposed to run. That's the way every country is supposed to run. And that means if a populist priest comes out of the woodwork with 2/3 of the vote, without any money or any publicity, just basing himself on grassroots organizations that aren't supposed to exist, that's not the right kind of democracy. So, of course, it has to be stopped. And that standard, Haiti still hadn't, they're kind of backward and uncivilized and haven't figured this out yet. But though the United States has been trying to teach it to them for a long time. Well, I'm say a few words about history. Those of you who've taken a history course in junior high school will remember that half a millennium ago, a group of savage barbarians in the west of Europe launched an assault on the rest of the world and have practically devastated it ever since. One of the first places they came to was, in fact, Haiti, which they were overawed by what they found, by they regarded it as the Spanish, this is Columbus. Las Casas, the great contemporary historian, described it as the most densely populated part of the world, which could have been true. And they were overwhelmed by the wealth and the peaceful population, maybe 8 million people or so, and they just couldn't believe it. Well, the current Haitians can't remember what happened to their ancestors, those who Columbus found, because they were wiped out within about 25 years or so. They just were no good as slaves and so on. And they brought in African slaves to be able to extract the wealth of the country and send it back where it belongs, namely to the savages in Western Europe. And it did. Haiti was the richest colony of the world. Perhaps it was the only comparable one, also discovered so-called pretty early, was Bengal, which the British, when the English came, they were also astonished at its wealth and advanced industry and so on. And it's maybe an oddity that the two symbols, very symbols of disaster and impoverishment today, are Haiti and Bangladesh. That is the two richest areas, maybe the two richest areas of the world, and the longest under Western rule. actually that generalization kind of extends to the Western Hemisphere itself. In the 20th century, Haiti has been the leading beneficiary of U.S. intervention, all kinds, military occupation, aid, experimental programs, scientific approaches to how to do things, and oddly, it's the most impoverished country in the hemisphere. There are two countries that vie for second place. Every year they shift a little. They're Guatemala and Nicaragua, which by accident happen to be the second major targets of U.S. intervention in the hemisphere. That's another one of these odd accidents, like the fate of Bengal and Haiti over centuries that you would only know about if you took a real course in history. Then it would be taught in junior high school and the implications of it, and it goes on from there. This is not the only example. Haiti Haiti was incredibly rich. It was producing about 3/4 of the sugar in the world and all sorts of things, but producing it for the conquerors. A large part of France's wealth comes from Haiti, just as a substantial part of England's wealth comes from Bengal and other areas it conquered, and left completely devastated, of course. 200 years ago, the Haitians did make a serious mistake. They carried out the first and only revolution of the 18th century. It's the only one that met the conditions of the Enlightenment. That is, it called for universal freedom. None of the others did that. The French and the American Revolution obviously didn't qualify. And that appalled civilized people. It appalled them so much that there apparently was no discussion in France or in England or the United States of the very idea that black slaves could liberate themselves. It was just too appalling. When they finally succeeded at a horrifying cost, Talleyrand, the great French statesman, wrote to James Madison that all civilized people must be horrified at the sight of armed Negroes carrying out massive atrocities against the French, who just really belonged there, and driving Europeans out of their country. And that was, in fact, the view. I mean, Haiti was punished, as you said. It was punished by being forced to pay severe indemnity to France for the crime of having liberated itself. That's not the only case, incidentally. Again, as I'm sure you learned in junior high school, when George Washington, in the middle of the Revolutionary War, decided to wipe out the Iroquois civilization, which was in many ways more advanced than the colonists, except in modes of warfare. He succeeded, but they had to pay an indemnity too. DeWitt Clinton, the governor of New York, made a treaty with them after sufficient bashing, and they demanded, and had to do it, that they compensate the colonists for the crimes they had committed by resisting the assault that Washington's forces led against them. This was right during the Revolutionary War, incidentally. And it's not the only time. In the 1980s, Nicaragua, the U.S. was ordered by the World Court to pay substantial reparations to Nicaragua for the crime of international terrorism for which it was condemned. But power relations turned it the other way around. Nicaragua pays indemnities to us. The Vietnamese have to pay the United States the costs the costs of running the client regime in South Vietnam. Literally, that's what's happening. And that's the way power relations work. Haiti's a particularly grotesque example of it, but it's true. Finally, the U.S. did recognize Haiti. It was the last major country to do so. And it was 60 years. It was 1862, and there was a reason. It was right in the middle of the Civil War. They were going to liberate the slaves. And there was a problem about what to do with them. We had to satisfy Thomas Jefferson's dictum that the country had to be, as he put it, free of blot or mixture of red or black. Well, the red part was pretty easy. You just exterminate them. But the black part, they were hoping that they could be sent somewhere. In fact, the United States recognized Liberia in the same year, 1862. The idea is, well, sort of get rid of these savages who don't belong here. And that was the context in which Haiti and Liberia were indeed recognized. The latter part of the 19th century, the European powers in the United States were jockeying for control of the Caribbean, which was a very central area in world affairs. For one reason, because it was the main source of soft drugs, tobacco, rum, sugar, which were very badly needed in order to pacify the working classes in England and others who were benefiting from early industrialization by being devastated themselves. A lot of the wars of the period were in fact fought over the Caribbean for those reasons. Actually, the same story goes on in India, but I don't want to get too far off. The British actually were running the biggest narco-trafficking enterprise in history, it turned out, in the late 19th century. Interesting story for that reason. The end result of it was that the U.S. became the dominant power by the early part of the last century, and Haiti was still considered a very important colony, plenty of wealth worth having. Woodrow Wilson invaded it in 1915. It's an example of what's called until today Wilsonian idealism. He invaded Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and here the memories split. You know, the Haitians remember it one way, the United States remembered another way. When Clinton sent the Marines in 1994 to restore democracy, I'll get to that, there was a lot of discussion in the press and scholarly literature and so on, and there were a lot of warnings that Clinton ought to be careful not to, before following the course of Wilsonian idealism, which tried to impose order in this savage place in 1915. And in fact, the New York Times even compared the problems he was facing to those of Napoleon in the early 18th century. Napoleon and Wilson, both idealists, were trying to impose order on savage places where the people have homicidal tendencies and have no experience with democracy like Napoleon had, and have no savagery like the United States had. You read this right in the main columnists in the New York Times and Washington Post. And we have to be really careful about that, because these savage gangs with their homicidal tendencies, on the one hand, the Tonton Macoute, who killed, I don't know, tens of thousands of people under the Duvalier dictatorship, and another one was the military junta, which the U.S. was actually supporting, though it was pretending to be opposed to, which had killed, I don't know how many, maybe 5,000 people. And then the third homicidal gang was the peasants in the hills and the people in the slums who had conducted, who had really made this hideous error of having voted in as president somebody who was going to carry out reformist policies. So between these three gangs with their homicidal tendencies, seeking revenge in the traditional Haitian fashion, barbarians who don't understand anything about civilization and stuff, which is exactly the way it's discussed, the U.S. should be cautious. From the Haitian point of, from the U.S. point of view, the Wilson occupation was benevolent. So in 1994, leading historians like David Landis at Harvard explained that this was a period that really brought many benefits to Haiti for the first time. But as he pointed out, even the most benevolent occupation does sometimes arouse resentment. So the Haitians kind of didn't all totally applaud. And others chimed in with the same story, other distinguished figures. The State Department had explained at the time, and this goes into history, that many of the measures that the Wilson introduced were indeed very benevolent. So, for example, they induced the Haitians, as the State Department put it, by rather high-handed methods. I'll come back to those. But they induced the Haitians to accept progressive changes in the Constitution. See, these backward people had laws which prevented foreigners from buying up the entire country. And that is very unprogressive, and it's obvious why. Anybody who's taken an economics course would understand the State Department reasoning. Obviously, to develop, Haiti needs foreign investment, and you can't expect U.S. investors to put money in there unless they own it. So the best way to raise Haiti out of its backwardness is to change the Constitution to allow Western, U.S. means U.S. Corporations to buy up Haiti's lands. And what were the high-handed methods? Well, the high-handed methods were to send the Marines in to kick out the Parliament and then to write a constitution. The author, the person who took credit for the Constitution, though probably falsely, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who incidentally hoped to make a killing on it himself by buying up some Haitian lands. The new Constitution was presented to the Haitians for a vote because we're a democratic society, and it was voted in by, I think, 99.9% of the 5% of the population who voted. So the methods were kind of high-handed but benevolent. And it was also necessary to impose order. There are these savage gangs with homicidal tendencies, so the Marines had to restore order, and they killed, according to the internal Marine investigation, they killed 3,500 of them. According to Haitian historians, they killed 15,000 of them. But in any event, they killed enough so that they put down the resistance that even the most benevolent occupation elicits. They essentially reinstituted slavery. They forced labor. There was some road building, mainly for the corporations that were coming in to buy the place up. And indeed, a lot of it was bought up by the West, very progressive. West means mostly U.S. And they left the country after 20 years in the hands of a murderous National Guard, trained, armed by the United States, run by dictators. Exactly the same thing happened in the next door Dominican Republic, except in Haiti it was a little more vicious because there was plenty of racism with regard to the Dominican Republic, but they were only spics and dagos in the terminology that was used, whereas in Haiti they were niggers, and worse, they were uppity niggers. So Wilson's Secretary of State thought it was really comical to see, as he put it, niggers talking French. This is really funny. And they really had to be put down. So it was sort of similar in the two countries, but two halves of the island, but much more vicious in Haiti. After that comes a period of U.S. domination from a little bit of a distance. So the Marines finally left after 20 years, but the U.S. kept control. This is in the 30s now. At that time, Haiti, according to U.S. producers, agricultural producers, Haiti was producing cotton, for example, more efficiently than the United States was. But that's no good. They had to be taught scientific methods of agriculture. So during the Second World War, when the United States needed rubber and other commodities for the war effort, it just took over very large parts of Haitian agricultural lands and turned them over to scientific methods of production of rubber and other crops. Total failure. A couple of tons of rubber came out, but the country was devastated. When peasants were finally able to go back to what used to be their lands, it was practically desert. Trees had been destroyed, the irrigation had been destroyed, and there was nothing there. Only the first of a number of scientific experiments. There were others. Meanwhile, it was under U.S.-backed dictatorships. In the 1970s, the World Bank and USAID decided to lend their assistance to this backward country, and they initiated a course of economic development that was going to turn Haiti into, as they put it, the Taiwan of the Caribbean. They really had a bright future ahead of them. The method was to destroy wasteful activities like agricultural production for your own use, because again, if you've taken an economics course, it's much more efficient to buy highly subsidized U.S. agribusiness exports instead of wasting your time producing your own food or producing anything else. And the idea was to turn Haiti into an assembly plant, essentially, for U.S. corporations. and who were very happy to use Haitian workers. They say they're very docile and disciplined, especially when they've got a military dictatorship and an army sitting on their necks. And they are much cheaper than the ones in, say, Panama and other places where, we haven't had that much progress. So it was going to, and in fact, this went along with other experiments, like, for example, USAID, Paul's written about this, decided that Haiti, a lot of the Haitian peasant economy was based on a very hardy breed of pigs. They were used not only for food, but it's all a big part of the culture. But the scientific agricultural experts decided that these pigs might be susceptible to swine flu, although there wasn't any. So they decided the best idea would be to wipe them out, which they did, and replace them with better pigs, ones from Iowa. So they brought in fancy pigs from Iowa, which, is that what they're called? White pigs? Yeah, white pigs. And they're great as long as you keep them in air-conditioned places and feed them with very fancy food that you buy from U.S. producers, at a high cost. So you can actually keep one of these pigs, apparently, if you have an income about, 3 times that of the annual income of a peasant in Haiti. That was another contribution. Meanwhile, the economic miracle proceeded. Haiti was turned on its way to becoming the Taiwan of the Caribbean. During the 1980s, wages dropped by about 50%. Haiti was self-sufficient in rice, virtually and in fact a pretty efficient rice producer. It could have been better, even. But that's inefficient. So they were forced to adopt the standard neoliberal package, structural adjustment package, cut your tariffs, privatize, that sort of thing. The result was that Haiti now produces, I don't know what it is, maybe 50% of its rice, maybe less, something like that. Because Haitian producers, no matter how efficient they are, cannot compete with U.S. agribusiness, which is getting 40% of its income from subsidies, government subsidies, under the Reagan administration. Remember, this is free market theory, which has a traditional form. It's markets for you, but state protection for me. That's the way it's run for hundreds of years, and that's why the world is divided into a first world and a third world. Actually, that's literally very close to true. So Haitian peasants, of course, can't compete with highly subsidized U.S. agribusiness, and they were wiped out. Now, in the neoliberal order, this free world that we live in, Haiti has a remedy. They can impose anti-dumping restrictions on the United States. That is, they can threaten the United States that they'll close the Haitian market to U.S. exports. The same way that Clinton does, for example, when U.S. consumers prefer Mexican tomatoes or Japanese supercomputers, he can just close the market to Mexico and Japan unless they threaten to do so, unless they stop exporting, and then they stop for odd reasons. And Haiti can do the same to the United States, because after all, it is a free system. It's the World Trade Organization rules, but for some reason they didn't do it. I couldn't figure out why. So Haiti was in fact devastated by this experiment again. Finally, the U.S. was supporting the dictators right all the way through until the last minute, when even the army turned against them, at which point the United States decided that there should be a transition to democracy. Then came, I won't go through the details, but the build-up to the election, which was certain, they were certain that the U.S. candidate would win. There's no way you could fail to win. And it came out the wrong way. And the U.S. instantly changed policies. U.S. aid was diverted away from the government towards anti-government agencies. Every effort was made to undermine the government. Aristide came into office in February 1991. The refugee policy was changed in radical violation of international law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Carter administration had begun barring people who were fleeing from the paradise that the U.S. was creating. Essentially not unusual. Take the Mexican border. The Mexican border is artificial, like every border. It's the result of conquest, and it's been very porous throughout its history. Until 1994, after NAFTA, the border was militarized under Clinton's Operation Gatekeeper. And the reason was because the effects of the economic miracle in Mexico were going to drive hundreds of thousands or maybe more impoverished, devastated people north, and that had to be stopped because it's our conception of free trade. It's for capital, not for people. And the same was true in Haiti. As the economic miracle was put into effect, people started fleeing in desperation. So the U.S. Coast Guard and Navy blockaded the place under Carter and just sent them back. That's in total violation of every... they were fleeing real persecution as well as impoverishment, but U.S. sent them back. Under Reagan, that was turned into a formal treaty with the Duvalier dictatorship. But in 1991, the U.S. reversed it. An independent democratic government came in. The flow of refugees virtually halted. In fact, it turned the other direction as people were going back in a moment of hope. But at that point, any refugee who did come was granted asylum. No more sending them back to Haiti. So for 7 months, until the military coup, the policy on refugees reversed. After the military coup, went back to the old policy. Bush again started returning the refugees. Clinton harshly condemned this in the 1992 election, and as soon as he got into office, he made it even harsher. That's military. The government was doing was actually, in the 7 months it was getting considerable praise from international institutions, even from secret State Department reports that were leaked. It was for progressive measures, for eliminating needless bureaucracy, for getting rid of oppression and so on. They were getting substantial loans, in fact, which made it even worse because the country might fall out of U.S. control. Military coup came along. The Organization of American States declared an embargo. The Bush administration almost immediately undermined the embargo by exempting U.S. Producers, which happened to include plants owned by the Haitian elite, the rich Mevs family and others. They were excluded from the embargo and imports were allowed in. The explanation for this was, again, our benevolence. The New York Times explained that this was what they called fine-tuning the embargo to help the people of Haiti by exempting U.S. exports. The people who they were helping were bitterly protesting, and the military junta and its wealthy supporters were overjoyed, but it was all done for the people of Haiti, just as we've always done. It got worse under Clinton, considerably worse. Furthermore, both the Bush and the Clinton administration authorized the Texaco Oil Company to violate presidential directives and provide oil to the junta. Anybody who was there could see the oil coming in. But the U.S. government and the CIA testified to Congress that no oil was coming in. You know, those oil farms that you saw didn't exist, and the picture, you know, it turned out right the day before the invasion to restore democracy, it was revealed that both Bush and Clinton had authorized that. Oil as the centerpiece of the embargo. Also, the U.S. was arming and training Haitian officers. The head of the paramilitary organization, FRAP, which is responsible for thousands of deaths, was on the CIA payroll. It's kind of conceded by now. Officially, the U.S. was opposing the junta. In fact, it was supporting it. Then it restored democracy after they thought the popular organizations had taken a sufficient beating, and thousands had been killed, and they'd been sufficiently terrorized. And the terror was extreme. I mean, I don't want to talk about it because you know much more than I do, but I was there for a few days at the peak of the terror. And, you know, I've been in places that are under severe repression. I just came back from Turkey a couple days ago, where in the southeast, where it was, there's 15 million people living in a dungeon, you know. In an area where millions of people have been driven out of the surrounding region, which has just been devastated in some of the worst ethnic cleansing and atrocities of the 1990s, for which you and I paid, incidentally. This was done with U.S. support and military aid, and that's why you don't hear about it. Yeah, I'm up. Compared with the people there are under severe repression, police everywhere, army everywhere, but there are other places. I've never seen anything like what I saw in the slums of Haiti back in 1993 when people were literally afraid to talk. The only thing they would say is things like, there are eyes everywhere, can't talk, that sort of thing. But after this terror had succeeded, they thought, in achieving its ends, Aristide was permitted to return, but on a condition, namely the condition that he accept the program of the defeated U.S. candidate. So if you, which is precisely the wording that was used. They said you've got to direct, the renovated government has to direct its action, has to focus its policies on the needs of civil society. Primarily, that means the private sector, both national and international. So U.S. investors are Haitian civil society, but the people in the slums and the hills aren't. And the very harsh structural adjustment program was imposed. I won't go through the details because it's too late, but it succeeded in further devastating what was left of the economy. And the Haitians still resisted. That's why they haven't understood what democracy is. And they'll have to come to learn this. 200 years we've been trying to teach it to them, and they still haven't gotten the idea. So you can understand why there's an embargo.
Chomsky criticizes U.S. actions in Haiti as hypocritical, claiming the U.S. prioritizes its own interests over democracy and human rights. For instance, he questions why the U.S. supported Aristide's return only as a figurehead while allowing a military-backed government to remain in power. Well, I hope you like this video clip and subscribe to the channel. Now, take care and bye-bye.